Yeah, she's got some nice long hair.
Welcome back to the Unbearable Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Barron, joining you again as we have to break down this introductory press conference for the Chicago Bears. So you can follow me at the Draft Bard. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, you name it. Just search for Unbearable Sports and you can find us there. If you're listening somewhere else, just make sure to drop a like and also make sure to subscribe. You can also listen to us on the new Burns radio station that is debuting today. And also you can watch us on Tiki Live Mondays and Thursdays at 9 Central, 10 Eastern time in the AM. But also feel free to listen to us on any podcast network. Just try to rate us 5 stars. It helps out tremendously when people do that. But like I was saying, we're going to be breaking down the introductory press conference. We finally listened to our head coach and our brand new GM. So I'm excited to kind of break this down and kind of talk about, we finally have why they were brought in and also what they want to bring in as head coaches, as a GM as well. So I'm really excited to kind of share what they were talking about if you weren't able to catch it at all. But like always, we first have to get into some news before we get started. So a couple little nuggets that happened or didn't happen today. The first one is that Jim Harbaugh still is not on any team. So there's some rumors out there that he was kind of playing hard to get, that maybe he's trying to do this to kind of get a little bit more love in Michigan. So we still have to wait and see to see if he's actually going to become the Vikings' new head coach or if he's not. But then another piece too, I've just forgot to kind of mention this before, but it looks like the Bears are looking at the Browns offensive line coach. A lot of people are saying that that is potentially the best offensive line coach in the league. We've heard this before with Heastand. We've heard this with Castillo. It seems like there's a lot of really good offensive line coaches out there, but obviously the Browns have one of the top tier offensive lines. So if we can get the Browns offensive line coach, I'm all for it. Because if you see that offensive line, we know it, it's dominant. So if we can bring in that guy, obviously big win. So hopefully it also kind of goes with the scheme from the offensive side. But let's get right into this. So they met today at about 11 o'clock Central Time, and George McCaskey kind of kicked things off. So just said a little bit of things, but then passed it over to Ryan Poles. So then we saw Ryan Poles go up there and he kind of had his introductory and thanked a lot of the people on the Chiefs. Now, I do want to just call this out because you might have seen a little bit of this out on Twitter. He got choked up immediately. Now, I think it rubs some people the wrong way, but honestly, I like it. If you're leaving a job that they gave you everything, it's got to be hard to leave that. So I understand why he's feeling so choked up, because these people helped you out and really made you the person that you are now, as now a GM at a really young age. So because of that, I totally get why he's choked up. I get why he was kind of brought to tears. So it was kind of a cool little moment from my personal perspective. I just like to see somebody who cares that deeply about his team, his teammates, and everyone else around him. And it says more about him, the person, than anything else. So I know some people didn't like it, but I think majority of us really like that because it just showed he's a person. he's a person, and you can kind of connect with him at that level. But what I also really liked was he was talking about just how he plans to build this team. Now, the big thing that he talked about is building through the draft. We'll touch base a little bit more when people started getting into more of the question side of things, but he really was trying to emphasize and he wants to build through the draft. He repeated this multiple times, but what he's saying is that he also wants to get some young, fast, physical players in here. And you'll see too, there's a common theme that the the idea of fast players, kind of these physical specimen, and also just playing hard. That's what this team seems like they wanted to kind of build around. But Ryan Poles really kind of started the conversation off by saying that he's a big fan of fast players. Now, obviously, you can see that with Kansas City. We talked about this in the preseason. That seemed like the Bears wanted to get faster, just like Kansas City, because they just win with speed. They're just a lot faster than anyone else and a lot more physically gifted. So if you get fast people, you should be better. Bears got fast wide receivers, did absolutely nothing with it. So when I'm re-evaluating some of these players and I'm looking at the draft, I'm trying to think about it like Ryan Poles. Think about a lot of fast, physically gifted people, and then you have a coaching staff that can kind of grow those people. But one of the best things that he said is that he wants to take the North and he never wants to give it back. That's something that all of us Bears fans love. You might have seen that out there, but he was really just hearing that he wants to take the North kind of just makes you feel excited, gets the hairs on the back of your neck standing up a little bit. You love to hear that from someone. But then also he talked about being selective in free agency. And I think that makes me feel, the more that he talked, the more that I really liked Ryan Poles, because he was talking about it makes sense, because a lot of times people say that we're just going to get whoever in free agency. Now, yes, these are all words. We got to see action, but I like the term selective in free agency, because being selective means that you're choosing the people that you want. And I think that too many times we saw Ryan Pace just say, hey, we need a pass rusher, so I'm signing Pernell McPhee to a huge deal. We need a tight end. I'm going to sign Jimmy Graham to a huge deal. It seems like he just kind of was reaching for some people out in free agency. So you want to be selective because you don't want to bring on all these crazy contracts. So personally, I like the term selective. But then also that he talked a little bit about the selection of the head coach. And to him, it's what we were hoping for. He said he was really focused on leadership, energy, and vibe, really kind of going off of the energy of the head coach rather than what's the scheme, what's this. It's all focused on the people leadership aspect. So really that introductory really showed me a lot about him. And then he brought on Eberflus when he or Flus, and he comes out and starts talking. Now, same thing. When Matt came on, he was then talking about the emphasis on athleticism. He said that he's going to be running the team a lot, so get the track shoes ready. He kind of has this old school mentality to him where he's about just effort. He's about giving it your all, which you want to see. We talked about this last episode. The Bears need to be trying more out there on defense. That's what you want to see, and this is what he's trying to bring. And he also said he's bringing this hits concept. And what hits, HITTS, is hustle, intensity, toughness, taking care of the ball and taking it away, and smart situational football. So he's really kind of focusing on, as a head coach, he's trying to instill these mindsets. And it was really cool. And it was honestly really refreshing to kind of hear, because he really wants to be the head coach. He doesn't want to be the defensive coordinator. He doesn't want to be the offensive coordinator. He wants to be the head coach. He wants to be in charge of everyone else around him. And that's what I love to hear, because instead we had Matt Nagy that said, this is my offense. This is how we're going to run it. I'm going to run these plays, and that's how it's going to be. Eberflus comes in and says, I am here to change the energy, change the vibe, and kind of just get everybody on board. And to me, that was awesome. That's awesome and refreshing to hear as a Bears fan. So they kind of won me right off the bat. Now, Eberflus, he does kind of look like a like a church counselor a little bit, and there was a couple things that he was mentioning that seemed a little corny. But honestly, I'm excited to see, and I'm excited and curious, I guess, to see how exactly he works with this team. And hopefully his message does come across not as corny, but actually as somebody who truly cares. He seemed a little bit nervous up there. Same thing with Ryan Poles, but they still did a good job. But then this is where people started getting into the questions. Now, I already kind of slightly alluded to this about Eberflus being more of a leader rather than a defensive coordinator or an offensive coordinator. One of the more interesting questions was, is he going to be calling plays on defense? Because he is a defensive minded head coach. Now, Eberflus, what he said is it wasn't, we have to wait till a defensive coordinator comes in. He said, no, he is not going to be calling the plays, which is huge. It's a huge shift in mindset because he's no longer calling the plays. He's going to have the defensive coordinator call the plays, offensive coordinator call the plays, and he's going to be there on the sidelines. And it's that lack of an ego. It's that lack of, I trust the people that are around me and that they're going to do the best job. Obviously, we have to see this in action, but it was just very, very refreshing to hear from a head coach that, hey, he's not going to be doing this. He's trusting other people to get everything done and they can focus on it. What I also like as well is that this allows your people to be up in the booth. And I think that that is a competitive advantage. When you're up in the booth, you can see everybody. You can see all the different formations a lot easier. If you're on the ground, it's very hard to be like, oh, they're running a cover three, they're running a cover four. Oh, they're always double teaming this one person. And it's harder to see what exactly is happening. So I like the idea that potentially our OC and DC could be in the booth and actually be calling plays from up there. But like I said, just a nice breath of fresh air. One of the big pieces as well, we're already talking about the athleticism, the emphasis on athleticism. Now, there was a lot of kind of questions about what style are we going to be bringing? And they kept saying it's this attacking style. Like they really want to just constantly be attacking you, constantly be in your face. So that's kind of the emphasis on the hustle, but also they emphasized more and more about the chunk plays. They said that, listen, you have to get chunk plays because you saw that on Sunday people were able to score because they got chunk plays. It's not about just 4 yards here, 4 yards there, and consistency. It's about, boom, we just got 20 yards. Now that we got this 20 yards, we're halfway there. Now we can easily score. And they really kind of emphasized we need to get chunk plays. And they said it starts with just establishing the run. And I feel all Bears fans, maybe someone told them that that's what we've been craving because it just seemed like they answered perfectly because it's like, yeah, we never had any chunk plays. We have all this speed. We have a great deep ball thrower, but we're not getting the chunk plays. So they were talking about just emphasizing that and emphasizing that we are just going to be constantly attacking. Now, for me, as I'm looking at a lot of this talent, I really am actually starting to shift the way that I kind of see the players and try to shift it more towards what they were kind of talking about. Now, like I mentioned a little bit before, they want that athleticism, but they want that game changing ability because, yet again, those chunk plays, they want people that if you throw a screen, they can take it 10 or 20 yards, like a Debo Samuel. Yes, Debo has been amazing, but when you surround Debo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk and these other people that were known for making big plays, you want to bring those people in so that if you throw a screen to three different people, you feel like they can at least break it out for a good chunk of yards. If you look at this Bears team right now, who would be able to do that? You couldn't really say many people because Mooney's solid, but he's not a game breaker. He's not a big, quick. I mean, he's quick, he's speedy, and he can take the top off the defense. But still, you wouldn't say that he breaks tackles like crazy. He's good, but he's not that next level type of a shifty person. So it's just something to be on the lookout for with that. But as I'm looking at more of the tape, it is who's great at that game breaking, bring it to the house anytime that they can touch the ball, because it seems like that's the types of people that they want to bring in. They also want to get more physical. So you're thinking about the front lines, you need those big maulers up front Think about Tevin Jenkins, Larry Borum. Those are the guys that you want. You want to be just imposing your will in this run game and really kind of get that run game established. I was getting excited when I was hearing them talk all about this stuff because that's what we need. It's everything that we missed out on. Now, speaking of things that we missed out on and why I think he might have known so much, Ryan Poles was talking about that he did talk to Matt Nagy. Now, I think that it was interesting that he was actually talking to Matt Nagy, and Matt Nagy actually told him a lot of the things that he wish he would have done. So it's cool to know that Ryan Poles was at least talking to Matt Nagy before he made the decision and kind of said, "Hey, what didn't happen and give me the lay of the land of Chicago just before I actually move over and accept the terms." So it's nice that he was at least talking with them and seemed to know a little bit more about Chicago before at least accepting the job. So he probably knows. He probably got warned about the McCaskies and everything else before he ended up taking the official job. Now, another big piece of news that came out of this is that we are officially going to be moving from a 3-4 defense to a 4-3 defense. Now, this is something that Matt Eberflus did not talk to the other players about because, in his defense, he said, I haven't been able to talk to many players. So when I'm talking to them, I'm not going, hey, guess what? We're switching up the defense. He's like, I'm more so talking to them about them, their families, what they like, who they are, rather than talking to them about schemes because I only have so many hours in the day. So the 3-4 to the 4-3 defense, talked about this last episode, probably shouldn't be that big of a change. Khalil Mack will be interesting. He should probably be a defensive end, but you never know. But at the same time, too, it really does depend on how much we're running nickel, which is probably going to be majority of the time. It's still a similar concept. You have two interior linemen, you have two outer linemen, and then you have however many linebackers you want to trot out there. It's to me, it's not a huge difference. It might actually be a little bit better too, because Khalil Mack is very versatile, and we know that Robert Quinn loves to play with his hand in the dirt. So that could be a little benefit, but it might be another thing that we're looking at is just more more linebackers to bring in because we really kind of have one true inside linebacker at Roquan Smith. But they did actually talk a little bit about Roquan Smith as well. He's someone that Eberflus is excited to get started with, and that was just something cool that we were able to kind of hear him talk about. But he didn't want to give too much credit because he didn't want it to seem like there was, that he was his favorite player or something like that. There's also a question too about draft picks because Ryan Poles said that draft picks, you want to have a lot of draft capital so you can kind of hit on a lot of these draft picks. But someone brought up, you only have 5 draft picks. Are you thinking about trading? Are you thinking about getting more? And he just kind of gave one of those non-answers that said, well, we don't really we don't know what we want to do yet. We could trade, some people, we could trade some other things. We'll just have to see. But one of my favorite things that he talked about with or Ryan Poles talked about with how he kind of navigates the draft board. Because they asked him, well, how are you supposed to hit on draft picks? how how are you going to get these? How are you going to build through the draft? Because the draft is kind of a crapshoot. And one of my favorite things that I don't think anyone's really talking about is he talked about the importance of of kind of structuring your board so you know when people are going to get pulled off. Now that's the way that I kind of put together my own board. And I think about it all the time where even with like David Montgomery, I didn't mind them trading up for Montgomery, the Bears back in the day, because there was such a huge drop off at running back talent from Montgomery to everyone else. Now, there is something to be said when you are structuring that board, just where's all the talent at? Because, sometimes some draft classes, the drop isn't that bad. But at the same time, too, you want to make sure that you get a certain tier of talent. So I like the idea of him saying, hey, it's not just we're going to select best available. It seems like he actually has a plan and he knows what he's doing. And he's saying, listen, that we need to select the proper people, not just based on best person available, but let's just say this year, there's a huge drop in tight ends. So if there's a good tight end and there's only two on the board, and chances are, and our next pick, none of those good ones are going to be on the board, we should probably pick one up. It should be good value, but also we want to get that top tier talent. So I just like the way that it seems the way that Ryan thinks about the draft. But another thing that came up too was just Matt Eberflus. How did you know that this was the coach? Because it seemed like a lot of the Bears media was kind of trying to probe a little bit on did McCaskey, did anyone else kind of force you into Eberflus? Because some people started saying, well, don't you wish that you would have had more time to kind of select a head coach? And he said, I had all the time in the world. I knew that I wanted Matt, so I selected Matt. So he also said too, when Matt came into the room and they started talking, he knew that Matt was the guy. They talked before all of this, and Matt was on his list, and he knew Matt, and he really liked Matt as a person, as a coach. So that's a big reason why he said, hey, as soon as he started talking to him, he knew that he was the guy. So that's what he wanted. But going back to Matt, because I've been talking a lot about Ryan, and actually I don't even think that Ryan talked that much compared to Matt. Another thing that just something to get excited about as a Bears fan, because we're talking about all these differences. Matt Eberflus breaks down the whys. And we all know Matt Nagy would always be like, we got to search for the whys this week. We don't know what the whys are. We have to look at that. But Eberflus, even just looking at some of his old press conferences, he understands why something happened that day. Rather than trying years to figure out why something's not working, he more so knows in the moment why something didn't work, why things did or did not happen the way it should be. So, another change with the new head coach that we just really, really want to see. But also, speaking of that, too, one of the things that he talked about is they want to maximize what someone is good at, not force a scheme. And that's something that Matt Nagy had his scheme, the Kansas City scheme. This is my scheme. This is how it's done. And this is what we're going to do. And he said it in his introductory press conference. He said, yeah, it took Alex Smith 5 years to understand this scheme. Well, you're pushing this onto True rather than creating a scheme around him. And that's really what Matt Eberflus was trying to push, is that it's about the talent. Him and Ryan are actually going to go back, watch all the tape on all the different people, and what they were saying, they want to create a scheme, they want to create a philosophy that works with their players. Boom. like that's what it should be. That's what people should be doing with the roster that they have. But obviously we didn't have that at the old regime, and it's just such a nice breath of fresh air that, hey, we actually have a coach that wants to get the most out of our players. And this is something that, okay, these are all words, but we're seeing that also with how they have been in the past. Matt Eberflus has gotten the most out of Xavier Crawford, Rock Ya-Sin, all these other people that you wouldn't expect stuff from. Xavier Rhodes was left for dead. People thought that he was trash. Nobody wanted him. And Eberflus is like, we'll put you in a good position where you can succeed. And what do you know? He succeeded. He got brand new life. So I'm excited to see, how do they put our players in position to actually succeed rather than forcing them into a system that they might not need. And another thing that low key I absolutely love, they started asking about, what is the offensive scheme? What is that going to look like? Eberflus did push off a lot of the offensive conversation, said it's not really his forte, but really he was kind of talking about he was saying we need to build the concepts, the base of who we are and what we do. And we've never had an identity ever. And I've heard some previous Bears players say we always had one play that we knew would always work. The Matt Nagy era, we never had any plays that we could say, okay, this definitely works, because it seemed like nothing worked. And it was just really nice to hear that, hey, we have our concept that we are going to kind of push out there. And our concept, our fundamentals we're actually going to have like an identity on this offense. So it's something just nice for us that we're actually trying to push and have an actual identity. So it's just the low hanging fruit that everyone else seems to have on offense that we just want to get for our own team. But I'm just looking at other little notes that I just had down. I'm excited to see Matt Eberflus with a David Montgomery. I think that they'd be really close, because it seems like it's that concept of we want to get the most out of you. We want to be leaders. We want to be a team. And I think that Montgomery, I think Fields, I think Mooney, they're going to be eating that up, and they're going to be really excited about this. So next little step, it looks like Matt Eberflus also might have the ball hawk shirt and trophy that he did at Indianapolis. So when someone gets a takeaway, you get a point. Just something to be on the lookout for. He said he might be into it. He might bring that over, or he might not. But last little bits, George McCaskey also confirmed that he did reach out to Jim Harbaugh. So didn't want to go into too much detail, but also Justin Fields was the only player that was actually asked to go out there, which is awesome to see. But one of the biggest pieces was he was just saying, hey, it was weird last season not being the starting QB at the beginning of the season. So now it should be a lot easier because he knows he's the starter. It's all things that we love to hear. But honestly, I think I just got to wrap this thing up. There's a lot of stuff out there. I was just kind of going through my notes. But this seems like a whole new regime that seems to have their stuff together. Obviously, we'll see in the next coming weeks, but you want to just stay tuned here. Make sure to follow us at Unbearable Sports. Make sure to look for us out on your podcast apps. Make sure to follow, subscribe, send a like down below. Because you don't want to miss a thing. If you can rate the podcast, please do. It helps us out so tremendously. And Unbearable Sports Podcast, we're out.
Yeah, she's got some nice long hair, and you know that she's a bad chick.
Thank you for listening to this Belly Up Sports Podcast Network product. Some said we go belly up, so we made it our name, and we're still here.